Welcome to today's explainer. Look, let me guess. You've recently tried to build a brand new healthy habit, right? You started off with just incredible motivation. You lasted a week, maybe two if you were lucky, and then you completely quit. It's incredibly frustrating. But here is the absolutely most important thing you need to hear today. Failing to build a new habit is not a willpower problem at all. It is entirely a brain wiring problem. And the really great news? Once we understand that wiring, we can rewire it. So, let's dive into exactly how the science says we can do just that.
Seriously, why did you quit? Really think about it for a second. You probably blamed yourself, didn't you? You probably thought you just didn't want it badly enough. But the reality is you quit because you were relying almost entirely on conscious effort to maintain that new behavior. And conscious effort, it requires a massive amount of mental energy. It is physically and mentally exhausting for your brain to constantly force a new behavior. You didn't run out of character, your brain simply ran out of fuel.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The willpower myth. Why trying harder simply doesn't work. We need to look at the invisible, neurological war happening inside our heads. To really understand why trying harder fails, you have to look at who is doing the neurological heavy lifting. As you likely know, your prefrontal cortex, that's your conscious decision-making center, gets exhausted super easily. When you try to force yourself to go to the gym, your prefrontal cortex is working overtime. It's literally like pushing a giant boulder uphill. Instead, we want to shift that heavy load to the basal ganglia. This is the automatic storage unit for your habits, and it operates almost effortlessly. Our goal isn't to force the prefrontal cortex to work harder. Our goal is to get our new behaviors safely stored into the basal ganglia so they become basically automatic.
Now you might be wondering, how long does that transfer actually take? Well, we've all heard that old 21-day myth for building a habit, right? Yeah, it's time to shatter that. A fascinating study from University College London by researcher Philippa Lally revealed that on average, it actually takes 66 days for a new behavior to become completely automatic. And for some of the harder habits, it can take even longer. So if you've been quitting at day 22 because it still feels like a struggle, you are stopping right in the middle of the neurological process. Give yourself some grace and expect the whole shebang to take about 2 months.
It all comes down to neuroplasticity. You've likely heard the famous neuroscience phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. Every single time you repeat a behavior, like lacing up your running shoes or meditating, you are physically strengthening the neural pathway in your brain through a process called myelination. Think of it like paving a muddy dirt road into a high-speed superhighway. Because of this, old habits are incredibly hard to just delete. You can't just hit backspace. Instead, we have to focus on building new, stronger highways to replace the old ones.
Moving on to Section 2. Your brain on habits, the neurological engine. Why does the brain even go through all this trouble to automate things? Well, the fundamental truth is that your brain is intensely lazy, but in the best way possible. It actively wants to automate things to save precious energy. And the fuel for this entire automation engine? Dopamine. Now, while we often think of dopamine as just the reward chemical, the thing we get after we do something good, it's actually released in anticipation of the reward. It's what drives the craving before the action even happens. This spike in dopamine creates a powerful urge to complete the habit loop. And honestly, this mechanism is exactly why endless scrolling on social media is so effortlessly addictive. Your brain is just constantly craving that next dopamine hit.
But there's a dark side to this automated engine, and that's stress. When you're under pressure, high cortisol levels cause the brain to panic and seek the path of least resistance. The prefrontal cortex basically just shuts down, and cortisol pushes your brain right back toward those deeply stored automatic behaviors in the basal ganglia. This perfectly explains why we so often revert to our absolute worst habits, like eating junk food or smoking, the exact moment we feel stressed out or overwhelmed.
All right, Section 3, the habit loop, Charles Duhigg's 3-part engine. Every habit follows a specific blueprint.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the brain automates that sequence. First, you have the cue. That's the trigger that kicks your brain into automatic mode. Second is the routine, which is the actual physical, mental, or emotional behavior itself. And third, you have the reward, the payoff that helps your brain figure out, hey, is this particular loop worth remembering for the future? To change any habit, you absolutely must learn to identify and manipulate these 3 specific steps.
Which brings us to Section 4, hacking the setup, manipulating friction and environment. It's time to stop being a victim of our brain's wiring and become a neurohacker. The absolute most effective way to hack your habits is by manipulating friction in your environment. In chemistry, there's a concept called activation energy. It's the minimum energy required to start a reaction.
For your good habits, you want to reduce that activation energy to absolute zero. Literally place your gym shoes right by the door so you trip over them. Conversely, drastically increase the friction for bad habits. Remove the junk food completely from your sight. Designing your environment shapes your daily behavior infinitely more than relying on sheer willpower ever could.
This environmental design builds directly into how we plan, using a really cool concept called implementation intentions. Research by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer shows that vague goals like, I'm going to meditate more, almost always fail. But if you state exactly when and where you will perform a habit, for example, I will meditate at 7 a.m. in my bedroom, you literally double your follow-through rates. No joke, double. You are giving your brain a highly specific, undeniable cue.
Taking that a step further, we have this incredible formula from James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. It's called habit stacking. The rule is simply, after I complete my current habit, I will do my new habit. For instance, after I pour my morning coffee, I will write in my journal for 1 minute. This is a profound hack, guys. Why? Because you are attaching a brand new, fragile habit directly onto a strong, deeply ingrained cue routine reward chain that already exists in your basal ganglia.
Section 5. Strategies for Sticking, the Neurohacker's Toolkit. Let's look at some rapid-fire tactical hacks to make sure these habits actually stick.
First up in the toolkit is the 2-minute rule. Let's be honest, going to the gym for an hour is genuinely hard. But putting on your gym clothes and tying your shoes, that takes less than 2 minutes. The secret here is to scale down the starting action of any habit, so it feels utterly ridiculous not to do it. You don't have to read a book a week, you just have to read one single page. Master the art of showing up first, you can optimize the habit later.
So the crucial point is making the habit easy to start, but how do we make it attractive? That's where temptation bundling comes in. This is beautifully simple. You just pair a habit you need to do with something you want to do. Say you only allow yourself to listen to your favorite true crime podcast while you are actively exercising. By bundling them together, you are using the dopamine anticipation from the podcast to actively drive your motivation to work out. It's genius.
Next up, tracking and streaks. Having a visual representation of your progress is incredibly powerful. Every single time you cross off a day on a calendar, you get a little micro hit of dopamine, a built-in motivational reward. Famously known as Jerry Seinfeld's "don't break the chain" method, this leverages a deeply human psychological trait called loss aversion. Once you have a 10-day streak going, your fear of breaking that chain becomes way stronger than your urge to just sit on the couch.
Finally, to truly cement a habit for life, we have to look at the ultimate psychological anchor, your identity. A goal like "I want to run" is entirely outcome-based, but saying "I am a runner," that is a fundamental identity shift. True behavior change is identity change. The goal isn't just to read a book, the goal is to become a reader. When you shift your internal narrative to become the type of person who simply does the behavior, the friction disappears entirely.
We've covered the neurology, the loops, and some seriously actionable hacks. You now have the exact blueprint to rewire your brain and make any behavior automatic. So I'll leave you with this empowering question. Which habit will you build first using these tools? I want you to drop your answer in the comments below. Take that first small step today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and make sure to tune in next week where we'll be using these same analytical tools to explore the fascinating science of productivity. See that?